What's up, everybody? Welcome back to our case study series. I'm here with Robert Lopez and Kelly Reddy-Heffner. We're going to be talking about the Kims today. Now, in the previous two case studies that we've had, we've talked about, different stages of life, whether it's a kind of a newer pharmacist, a pharmacist that, has a younger family that's trying to work through different issues with college funding. Today, the Kims, they're going to be kind of in a spectrum more closer to those years of approaching retirement and really asking those questions about, hey, do we have enough? Can we start winding our careers down and look at retirement, more seriously? So Robert, Kelly, welcome back to this third installment of the case studies. How's everything going?
Going pretty well. How are you doing, Tim? Welcome back from
Awesome.
your sabbatical.
Yeah, appreciate it. I'm back, energized. I kind of enjoyed the time off, but happy to be back. Shaved my head, so I'm kind of in this weird period of like, should I shave it again or not? So yeah, doing fine. How about Robert? How's everything going with you?
It's going pretty good over here. Football season's upon us, so it's the good time of year.
Yeah, go Birds. Excited for that. I kind of told my wife Shay that we're back to that time where Saturdays and Sundays are going to be a little rough in terms of getting anything done. So yeah, I'm excited for football season. It's actually starting to cool down over the weekend here in the 70s, highs of 70s. So yeah, fall's coming. But so let's jump into it, guys. So as you guys can see, if you're watching on YouTube, we share the case study, kind of the fact pattern. So Robert's going to kick us off and go through who we're talking about today. Kelly's going to go through the goals and some of the debt, and I'll kind of set up the rest of it with wealth put in, protection, some of the tax stuff, and some of the other facts of the case. So go ahead, Robert, kick us off here.
Yeah, so today we're going to go over Andrew and Courtney Kim, who are 62 and 60 respectively. Andrew is an operations manager for a defense contractor. He makes $205,000 per year. Courtney is infectious disease pharmacist working for the VA. She makes $150,000 a year. They file their taxes married filing jointly. They have two sons, Peter and Logan. Peter is a software engineer, 32, married, two kids, living out in San Francisco. Logan actually is living back at the house. He's 30 years old, but he recently lost his job and is staying with parents for now. They live in Portland, Oregon. They have a combined gross income of $355,000, which breaks down monthly to $29,583, and their net, which is after taxes and contributions to retirement plans and insurance, is $11,795. They have expenses that break down as $3,500 for fixed expenses, $2,600 for variable expenses, and about $5,600 going to savings, which is better than the 50-30-20 that we aim for, and it's closer to a 30-22-47. They live in a 4-bedroom single-family house they purchased back in '86 for $105,000, which is worth well more now. It is completely paid off. Andrew's mother, who's 82, lives about an hour away, but that may be changing in the near future based on her health concerns.
And of course, as they approach this next transition phase, thinking through some of their goals. So they both are interested in retiring in the next 3 to 5 years. They want to make sure that they have enough and also see what their Social Security benefit will be as part of that retirement nest egg and what they have available. Thinking about downsizing, that's kind of a common conversation, but also with Logan back in the house and not sure about where mom may need to be residing and what assistance she will need. That's a consideration. They also have another son and grandchildren in California. Want to make sure insurance is squared away. There may be a time with a gap in health insurance, so understanding what that means before they can be on Medicare. They want to focus on some more leisure and do the traveling, see the people, do the national parks. And then they also want to make sure that they can take care of mom and that their children are in okay shape as well, and maybe save some money for the grandchildren's education in the future. So as we start looking at strategy, they also have some debt. They do not have mortgage debt, so that has been paid off in the last year, as Robert mentioned. They do have a car note, the very fun Tesla, which has balance.
You know a little bit about that. Yeah.
I do know a little bit about that. Yeah, that apparently pre-retirement, you need to get the fun car and then have to take care of it. So 35,000 left on that car note at 4.5% interest. And then they took out some private loans for Logan's education, currently at a 6.75% interest rate with 4 years left. And that balance is about 24,000.
Yeah. So as we look at the wealth building stuff and kind of be jumping back and forth between this and the net worth statement, like their cash in checking and savings is right about $100,000, which is they're probably a little bit overfunded there given the expenses that Robert laid out. In his 401k that he has with his defense contractor job, he's putting in 13.2%, which is about 27,000, which is what he can put in, 20,500. And then after age 50, you can put the extra 65 in it, 6,500 there. So 27,000 is what he's putting in. 6% of plus a 6% match that he gets from his employer. And it's right now invested in target date funds for 2035. Courtney has a TSP from the VA. So she's hasn't been with the VA long. We're going to assume the last couple of years. So her pension stuff can probably be, similar to what we see with a lot of our clients with regard to that. She's putting in 18%, which is 27,000. Plus she gets a 5% match. She's in basically 50% C fund and 50% I fund. So all equity. So common stock and international companies. She has an old 401k that she hasn't looked at for a while that has about 165,000 that we have to figure out what to do with that. They have a taxable account, a joint taxable account that has about 135,000 that they're putting in $500 a month. It's currently with an advisor that they speak with infrequently, mostly C-class mutual funds in an 80-20% mix. So probably some expense there that, we're not seeing that might be eroding some of the gains. A joint savings account, like I said, that they're putting 600. This was the $600 a month. This was the mortgage payment minus some property taxes. And then they have an IRAs hanging out there. Roth IRAs, 35,000 for Courtney, 85,000 for Andrew. That's managed by that advisor, all equity institutional funds. So probably being charged a fee on that. So all in all, between cash and the investments, and then the value of the house, about $2 million in assets, $2.1 million in assets. So it gives them a total, if we subtract about the $60,000 in liabilities, about 2.036 in net worth million, 2.036 million in net worth. In terms of the wealth protection, they both have term policies, $500,000, some group life insurance from their employers, both set to expire their own policies in 3 years. So at 65 for Andrew and 63 for Courtney. They have some short-term and long-term disability, own occupation through their employers. Courtney carries a professional liability coverage. And then from the estate perspective, they have a will, but it hasn't been updated in a long time, 20 years. Living will and power of attorneys also need to be updated. And there's just some concern about, Andrew's mom, if she has the right document, how that's going to affect, their financial plan. Taxes, they're doing it themselves right now through TurboTax, concerned about gains on the house if it's sold. So they would like to pay a lot less property tax in the future, which is also one of the reasons that they're looking to downsize. Concerned about taxes when they take money out of their traditional investment accounts. So just how to best spend down those accounts without being, killed in taxes. Some miscellaneous stuff. They're both in good health, but Andrew thinks that they should take Social Security ASAP because he doesn't want to lose out. So there's this idea that, I want to get every nickel that I put back in. So that's definitely a point of conversation that we need to have. Not sure if they should move out of the state or to a retirement community. Obviously with the concerns with Andrew's mother close by, and then should they go to a different state with family in California? Should they phase into retirement? Tougher with the VA, but Andrew could consult, be a contractor with his employer. And then Courtney is very worried about running out of money, would rather be safe than sorry, would rather work 2 more years if needed to retire, to make sure the money doesn't run out. So that is kind of the facts of the case here, guys. So I guess if we look at the goal number 1, they want to retire in the next 3 to 5 years. If the Kims were our clients, what is the best way? And Kelly, I'll start with you. What is the best way to start breaking down that question of, hey, are we on track to be able to retire comfortably and have the money last in the next 3 to 5 years?
So usually what we would do is start with a nest egg, just taking a quick look at what assets they have available, time interval for when they want to retire. You can get a Social Security statement from the Social Security website. So it would be good for them to download that data so that we can see what their monthly and annual amounts will be. There are differences in that amount based on the time frame when they take the Social Security. So there's a difference between taking it early, taking it at full retirement age. I'm guessing with their age range, it's 67 and some change would be full retirement age. And then there's also estimates at age 70. So sometimes age 70 can be a lot more advantageous than even full retirement age. So it's good to run the numbers and take a look. The nest egg gives a good high level, like how do things look in terms of being prepared for retirement. And then we also use software with eMoney to take a look at a little bit more granular detail, spending data. That was kind of one of the things that we had talked about previously in preparing for this is, if they spend a little bit less in retirement, make some changes, it really will have a big impact on overall what they can do. So eMoney allows us to model different spending scenarios and take a look at what the cash flow is.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is it's obviously looking at what they have, their investments, but then also like what is the potential, drawdown rate or withdrawal rate. So a lot of people are familiar with like the 4% rule, which is kind of a general rule of thumb that, if you have $1 million portfolio and you basically take 4% out every year, $40,000, a lot of the math says that can support 30 years of living off of that. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think let's talk a little bit more about the Social Security statement. So you mentioned that, and I think that's one of the things that, we see that can often be influenced by, what you read in the news, what your maybe colleagues have done, like they go to retire. Robert, how do you approach the conversation of when? Because a lot of the times, the client already has their mind made up about Social Security. And it's interesting, like Morningstar did a study, they said that a good advisor can basically add something like 30% more to your income in retirement. And 9% of that, the biggest chunk of that is proper Social Security claiming strategies. So I would broach that subject with a client, particularly if they kind of have their mind made up. In this case, Andrew is saying, hey, we need to claim as soon as possible. Walk me through your approach with that.
I think one of the biggest things that you can do for a client is really just kind of showing them all the data. So that Social Security statement that you can pull from SSA.gov that Kelly mentioned really has all that laid out. Now, when we look at Andrew and Courtney here, they look like they've probably been maxing out Social Security, meaning they're putting in the most amount that they can per year. And in 2022, if he draws now, if he were to retire today and draw, maximum withdrawal at 62 is $2,364 a month. If you were to wait until age 70, that draw would increase to $4,194 a month. So really showing that differentiator there of, this is $1,800 additional dollars per month that you would get by waiting. And then if he just waits until full retirement age, which is 67, then that is $3,345. So nice, like in the middle difference there. Really showing them how that would work. Now, for their case specifically, if they already have their minds made up and say, hey, I want to do this. He says, hey, I want to retire in 3 to 5 years and I want to draw as early as I can. Well, does as early as I can mean he wants to draw today and continue working? Because then we can show the tax consequences of those dollars.
Right.
How much tax are we going to be paying on those Social Security dollars if he's continuing to work? If he's not going to continue to work and we're going to wait, say 3 years and draw at 65, which is still before his, defined full retirement age, then we're not going to be taxed on the majority of that amount as long as she's not working either. And we can show, does this math work, right? Their expenses are not as high as they may believe that they are because they're saving a lot of money. So if we double up both their Social Security at age 65, maybe she works for 2 years longer than he does, so they both retire at 65. That kind of solves both of them, right? So he wants to draw as soon as possible. She wants to maybe work a few extra years to make sure that they get the value. Then their Social Security draw would be the same. But you would need to understand that if something were to happen, they lose one of those Social Securities, right? So it's not that you would get the other person's. If we were to wait, and we can show this benefit of, if for Andrew, we say wait until age 70, and we're getting that 41.94, if he were to pass away, then Courtney would take over his larger payment.
Correct.
So that's generally an argument that we can make, is whoever was the highest earner, we want to wait the longest amount of time, so that way we can get the benefit of those multipliers on the years after full retirement age. And the highest amount would be age 70 at this point in time.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we're trying to solve in retirement is making sure that the money doesn't run out for the amount of years that we're going to be alive, which we just don't know what that is. So it's an educated guess. And I think one of the things that a lot of people, and Andrew is kind of showing this, is like, the sooner the better, because that's when I get the paycheck. But for someone like him, who's the higher earner, in the fact pattern, he's right now making $205,000. Courtney's making $150,000 as the infectious disease pharmacist. Like, his Social Security is probably going to be higher at a baseline. So it might make sense, although he might be the first to pass away. And I think probably some questions about, Andrew's mother is alive. She's 82. Like, some history of like the family, like when did Andrew's father pass away, might play a part in this. But to your point, when one of the spouses pass away, you basically have the choice. You can either take Andrew's, which is probably going to be higher, or if it does in fact be the case that Courtney, she can just keep hers. But at the same breath, you're still losing a stream of income that you didn't have. And most of the time, a lot of the time, your expenses don't basically get chopped in half when the other person's no longer living, right? You still have all those fixed expenses, maybe food and things go down like that. So, to really combat against this mortality risk of like, okay, how do we prevent the money from, not basically being completely spent down? Social Security is going to be one of the biggest attributes for that. And with this particular type of client, it's going to be a smaller percentage of the income just because they make more money, and Social Security is going to be capped at a certain amount of income. But it's really important to make a smart claiming decision with regard to the Social Security. So to your point, pull in the Social Security statement. I think probably I would make sure that they both go through and look at their work years and the earnings tax for Social Security to make sure that that is accurate. So sometimes that can be inaccurate. And just seeing like what their current benefit is at, it basically outlines from 62 to full retirement age, because they're both born after 1960. That's going to be, it's going to be basically 67 is full retirement age. And then how does that change by percentage if we can lock in income if we wait to age is 70? And then, it kind of shows that in the benefit calculator estimate. So Social Security website is actually pretty good, and be able to basically pull down those statements in real time, I think is going to be solid. And the way that Social Security is calculated is it takes your 35 years, your 35 most highest paid years to make that calculation, which is another reason why potentially phasing into retirement or delaying retirement is going to be a big tool to make sure that, because we might log another year where they're both in this year, which, maybe they didn't do that early in the career. So in terms of like their, so we look at the nest egg, we might look at some of the spending. Kelly, how do you approach looking at this? Because, unfortunately, it comes back to that, the B word, which is budget. How do you actually walk clients through that and try to project what they actually will need from their, retirement accounts, starting with what does that look like in practice?
I mean, that's a great question. So the nest egg does like an estimator. So you do 70, 80, 90, 100, in this case, seeing that their expenses were lower, the nest egg worked estimating lower expenses. So I guess from there, the question would be like, if you estimated 50% of expenses for each side, like I kind of lean towards having the numbers in place so that people can see like, this is actually what this looks like. So we do have a spending budget template. And then we also can do things again in eMoney where there is an expense section where you can add in different anticipated expenses. So we see some go away. They're not going to be making retirement contributions if they're fully retired. In this case study, it will be interesting and would be a conversation with the client, although I suspect that they would ask it back to us to answer, like with Logan and mom, what can they afford to do? So it is an interesting time period and not all that uncommon for kids to be in an age where they still need a little bit of assistance in trying to define what that is and what you can afford to do for them and with them. The circumstance is unfortunate with Logan, but I think it is worth having the conversation about, like, it is still a private student loan on the balance sheet. It is him in their household. What is he contributing? How long? Have they set some parameters for what they're willing to do? And then us helping them figure out what they can possibly afford to do if they are interested in downsizing, which is on that goal list. Mom is a whole nother host of questions, like understanding what resources she has available and then trying to figure out what really they could afford to help her to do. So, I mean, I think the actual numbers are pretty helpful to see, especially when you do have other family members involved, and kind of really be as detailed as you can about what the budget might look like.
Yeah, I think, it's one thing to fill out a spreadsheet. And it's like, okay, I think this is what we pay for food, or this is what we pay for our utilities or travel. But then I think if you actually link it to credit cards and, debit cards and, savings accounts, checking accounts, typically there's a lot more there that we don't necessarily account for. So I think probably it's a good, kind of exercise to do both and then compare. And, I think there's some planners out there that they'll look at, hey, how much money came in? And, for year 2021, and they basically say, this is what I need to plan. I'm almost build a paycheck with just the same thing in mind, even going into retirement. A lot of, what we typically do in Nest Egg is we discount by a certain amount because we're not going to be saving, in this case, 13% for Andrew for his 401k and 18% for Courtney's TSP. So there's a discount just in that alone. But it kind of comes back to that. It's like, it's the building block of how we need to be able to disperse, once we make that decision with Social Security, what's the gap? And obviously it's going to be in phases. So if they do retire at 65, maybe we draw down the investment portfolio a lot more aggressively until we get to, a delayed Social Security, at 68, 69, even 70. And then that picks up and we let the investments kind of take a little bit of a breather for that. In terms of like this idea of like sandwich, the sandwich generation. So that's, where there's a household that's, basically they're taking care of themselves or trying to, but then they're also taking care of a parent and then an adult child. Tough conversations, guys. So Robert, like how do you begin to have that in terms of like, hey, we need to take care of number one, which is you, versus, hey, I know this is really important to you. Because, the other thing is like, they're also talking about, education for the grandkids, right? So how do we kind of begin to dissect that, that part of their financial plan?
I want to start off by saying I've never heard the term sandwich generation. And since Kelly's a member of that generation, I think it's very interesting.
Not 60 yet.
Generational.
Yeah.
No, I think having that conversation with Logan is the most important part, right? We don't know what his profession was in this scenario, right? He says he lost his job recently, had to move back in with mom and dad. Is he an engineer like his brother? Is he a developer? Is he, a starving artist? Like, kind of what's going on here, and how does that really work out? But kind of laying it out. We can't be the centers of the universe forever, right? And these, they're parents, so they want to take care of their kids. They want to help the generation after them. But they can't take care of everybody all at once. So really coming to terms with that, and letting the kids know. Logan might be very open to understanding of, hey, mom and dad want to retire in the next year or two. We really need you to be on your own. Hey, grandma's not doing so well. She's going to need your room, bud. You're 30 years old. It's time for you to figure it out. really kind of laying it out, I think would do well. And then having that conversation with Peter as well, right? Peter may already have education savings for his kids set up. Those kids may have another set of grandparents that are also trying to set up accounts and everything. So again, they don't have to be the center of the universe. They need to be the center of their own world, and make sure that they're taking care of themselves. Numero uno.
Yeah, and it might be like, again, we're not trying to solve everything, right away. Where if this is listed as the number 5, the last goal, it might be that let's get the let's figure out the debt, which the debt isn't bad. I think there's a question of, do we just take some of the cash that we have, the 100,000 between checking and savings, and apply that to the 59,000 that we have between the Tesla and the private loans being the 6 3/4, the Tesla being 4.5%, kind of clear the board there. Then we start looking at, as we get the expense information in a little bit better, if 65 is the goal, which is what I would be pushing for, because that's when Medicare starts. So there's not necessarily a gap in that regard from a healthcare perspective. And maybe it's like your will is actually, set to, bequeath some of that money to grandkids. Obviously there's in Oregon, you can get some tax advantages if you're putting money into a 529 today. But I just don't think it's minimal, So I think I think those things are possible, but I think we take it in bite sizes. And I agree with you, Robert. I think it's like, have that discussion with Logan, have that discussion with, mom, and see like where she's at in terms of like, because that's a lot of moms do not want to move back in, and that can be a struggle just to make sure that they're getting care. But there can be that loss of independence if they're now living with you, or if they have to go live in an assisted living or things like that. I think it's kind of level setting those expectations, and like what we always say, even with the education piece, is that you can't take retirement loans, right? So you can take student loans and other things, but eventually someone like Logan kind of has to figure it out and do their thing. But it can be a very strong pull on the financials. In terms of like this idea of like long-term care insurance, what is I guess what's your guys' take on that? As they're kind of right in that age where it's kind of like the challenge here is timing, like if and when to actually purchase these policies. So this, the sweet spot is usually 60 to 65. Some people say 50. The problem is if you purchase it at 50, you could be paying these premiums that go up regularly for 30, 40 years before you even have to, you make a claim. So I guess what's your guys' takes on the long-term care insurance question that they have in terms of looking at policies and purchasing them for, in the event that they need some assistance in that regard? Kelly, what do you think?
This is a hard question, I think, with the long-term care insurance. I'm going to be honest.
I agree.
So on the one hand, right, they're like, if you're going to pay premiums for a long time, it may add up that you have paid more in premiums than what you're going to get out of it. But care is expensive. So it does involve a little bit of personality and understanding what people's expectations are too. So if you have someone who is like, I am never leaving my house, I don't want people in my house helping me. I mean, that personality would be hard to justify a long-term care policy, because they are going to be very resistant to using what you would get from it. But the care costs are expensive. And at some point, that certainly should be a conversation piece, like how much could be anticipated in that cost. With all insurance products, it's a trade-off between paying a premium to have somebody else cover an amount that you cannot pay for out of pocket for a recovery that you would like to have in the event that something happens, or you're paying out of pocket. Like, you have enough resources to take care of the care that you kind of have in your mind that you want to have happen. So like in the e-money data, we do usually build in like 2 years at the end of assuming some type of substantial care is needed in those last 2 years. So that data can help answer this question to see like, what would that cost be? So it'll project it out in future dollars and give like a very realistic, like this could be what you would have to face. I mean, certainly things happen where care is needed ahead of those last 2 years. It can be a combination. So certainly the quality of the long-term care product would be a big piece. Like, can you get in-home care as part of it if that is what is desirable? So there's a lot of nuances. The person that helps give some quotes for some of the life and disability. They do some of the long-term care insurance as well. So we sometimes will talk to them about some of these questions and see scenarios where it makes sense. But again, personality, cost, what's the alternative if you don't have it? So sometimes it's a completely opposite, which is spending down and trying to figure out a strategy to not have so many resources.
Medicaid, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then are you okay with what that care looks like, in your area where you might be receiving care? So those are all very, very difficult questions to answer. If the cash flow is good and it makes sense to do it and it's affordable and you're in that sweet spot, if you're on the conservative side, you might lean towards doing it. If you like more risk or are more adverse to accepting care, it might not be as big of a priority.
Yeah. So, and just to back up, so when we talk about long-term care, that's really, it's insurance that provides assistance, usually through assistant living, nursing, home care, home health care, sometimes personal or adult daycare for individuals 65 or older that have a chronic or disabling. So this is typically people that, are having trouble using the bathroom, dressing themselves, feeding themselves, that type of thing. They did a study in 2020 that the current medium annual cost for assistant living is $51,600. For an in-home health aid is almost $55,000, and for a private room in a nursing home, it's $106,000, which obviously can be a pretty big chunk of that, investment portfolio. However, about 80% of long-term care is provided at home by an unpaid family member. So that's where you might, say, hey, Peter or Kim, like, what's the plan for this? I know conversations with my parents, they don't want us to have to really have to deal with that. They'd rather have some care by, something that they're paying for. So I think it's just family to family, but a lot of families, you're it, and that might be the case with like Andrew and his mom, is that, it's more of a self-insured type of thing. But as we know, with most things, the price of, this type of care is going up, and as are the premiums for these type of policies. And that's the challenge. I know some of the people that we wrote policies at my last firm is that they would buy these policies, and then a couple years later, the premiums would go up 10, 20%, and they would let them lapse. Or like, I'm just going to go at it, on my own. So it's really a personal decision in terms of, what your strategy is, and how you want to attack it. But it's definitely something that I think we, as fiduciaries need to, basically put to the table, and then, see what comes back from the client in terms of their approach. So it's a tough one. I'm with you. How about Robert? Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you guys did a really good job on that one.
What are outside of the, we talk about the insurance, any other gaps in like the protection? Obviously, I think one of the things, Robert, that we should be looking at is just like the estate stuff and making sure that is all updated and good to go, and probably start to look at the mom stuff too, right?
Definitely. Obviously, if you have an estate plan that was drawn up 20 years ago, there's going to be some things that have shifted or changed in that meantime. Your boys were, 10 and 12. At best at that point, maybe you want one of them to be your power of attorney or your healthcare proxy. Yeah. Maybe you want, a different family member to be that executor. Maybe you want to pass things along differently now that you have grandkids that you definitely didn't even imagine at that point in time when your kids were in middle school. So, and then definitely mom. we really want to understand what mom has going on. Is she independently wealthy and she's never going to have to live with us by choice? Does she have a bunch of heirlooms that she wants to pass along? Does she have her wishes laid out in order? Or do you know them? Because Andrew's going to be in charge of those decision-making questions. When the doctors ask, what does she want in this situation? You're going to have to know the answer, or you're going to have that document to provide. So really having those conversations or those legal discussions would be really valuable ahead of time. Most people, when we think about estate planning, it's because we don't want to become a burden to our family. We don't want to be troublesome in that situation. So we want to lay out as much as we can beforehand. And she may have all that fleshed out in a folder ready to go. She may have none of those documents, hopes and dreams that she's going to live to 200. So it's really important to understand where everyone lies on that and have really honest and open conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably a big risk that can be easily mitigated by just sitting down with an attorney and writing those things out. And just keeping it fresh in that regard. Probably the only other thing that I would address, I think there was concern about gains on the house if they sell that. I know a lot of that gain is going to be excluded, probably $500,000 if they're filing their taxes together. So there might be some gain that they'll have to realize and plan for. But if they basically downsize to a property, they might be able to exclude some of that as well. So I think probably working with a tax person as they're approaching retirement would be good. I think the only other big concern here, guys, that I have would be just looking at the overall investment allocation. So we're saying that looks like there are a lot of it's in equity. There's probably not a lot in bonds, 80-20 in the taxable account. They're approaching the eye of the storm with regard to if they're looking to retire in 3 to 5 years, really that's probably the one time in their entire investment lives where they probably need to be as conservative as they will ever be. And what we're really trying to mitigate here is sequence of return risk. So this is, basically where the market, corrects or we're in a recession, it goes down, 20 or 30%, and then you're withdrawing $40,000 out of that. That typically leads to unsustainable and rates of failure with regard to money from the portfolio. So as you're approaching that, that eye of the storm, so to speak, instead of having 80-20 or 100-0, we really need to be closer to maybe a 60-40, 50-50 to make sure that we're protecting the things that we've, grew over the course of their career. And then as we kind of come out of the storm when they're in their 70s and so on, maybe we get a little bit more aggressive because we kind of have it figured out and we're looking more towards making sure it's long term. And there's lots of different ways to look at that, whether it's a systemic, withdrawal rate, bucket approach, or something similar to that. But that would probably be is to look at the investments in totality and making sure that for these last couple of years, we're looking more from a safety perspective versus, let's try to get the portfolio as big as we can. So, guys, I think that's probably a pretty good place to start. Like, I think for this one, more questions than answers. I think that's a good thing. But appreciate the look at this case study with the Kims, and looking forward to number next time.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding material should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted, and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.